Hello, beautiful people. My name is Jason, and keeping with Heather's tradition of honoring the seasons, this yoga practice is dedicated to the winter solstice. It's a yin-yang practice, so we'll start out with a little bit of grounding and then some movement, the yang part, warm up, and because the winter solstice is seen as a solar season because of the sun's apparent motion across the sky, sun salutations are appropriate. So a few of those in the warm-up. And then when we get to the yin section, some slower, stiller postures that we reside in for roughly 2 minutes or so. Useful props in this practice are mainly for the yin part, which will be anything that relieves uncomfortable pressure points. So soft things like pillows and blankets. If you own some yoga blocks and a yoga bolster, maybe those are handy to have around too. So gather those up. Remember, my intention for practice is to honor the solstice, but you may have your own intention. So maybe remember that, and we'll get started. So the practice begins with a warm-up, just a gentle lateral bend stretch. We'll do this from a wide-legged child's pose position, and if that's too uncomfortable for you, you can always just do some gentle lateral bends from an accessible seated position, and that might be sitting up on some cushions. Otherwise, you want to do this from Warrior 4 or wide-legged child's pose. Come to hands and knees, and then bring your knees a little bit wider. So usually we say mat width, but whatever is kind of a comfortable width for your knees, and then let your hips sink back towards your heels until you stop, wherever that is for you. Lower your torso forward and extend your arms forward. Maybe stay here for a breath or two just to settle, but we will move the torso into a lateral bend here. So one more breath just to get used to this shape. And then start inching your hands and your extended arms over to the right side. So we're creating an opening in the left side of the torso here. So energetically speaking, the lateral bends are balancing, so we're creating a little bit of balance here. When you get into your final shape, that place where you feel the stopping point, soften and settle here so that you can get in touch with your internal sensations. You can notice your breath. You can start this sense of grounding, although we'll do a little bit more grounding here later on. Not here for very long. Maybe when you're ready, start moving back to center. When you get back to center, pause here for a moment. And then go ahead and slowly move on to the other side here. Stay here on this side and feel the opening, which might feel like some tightness and a stretch on this side for a few breaths here, and allow everything to soften and settle again. It's kind of melting towards the ground until it just doesn't melt anymore. And then use your breath to see if you can create a little bit more softness here. And then when you're ready, bring yourself slowly back to center. Bring yourself back up to hands and knees. Now we'll come into some stillness just for some initial grounding here. I'm going to suggest full child's pose, and full child's pose is sitting back on your heels, lowering your torso and bringing your arms back here. So the Sanskrit name of this pose is Balasana, which literally means child's pose. It also means strength pose, and if this is accessible for you, you can stay here. Now for some of us, this might be a pretty painful position to be in which case you can't ground at all if you're in pain. So an alternative is to make your way gently and slowly onto your back and just hug your knees into your chest. You can clasp your hands behind your thighs and just draw them in as far as they go until you find a stopping point that way. And you can just ground there. So the idea is to create a little bit of stillness for a moment, to maybe remember your intention for practice. And my intention, my dedication for this practice is the winter solstice. So this video is being recorded during the winter solstice season in the northern hemisphere, which is where I live here. Incidentally it's the summer solstice in the southern hemisphere here. And in the wintertime, everything is dark and quiet. And this pose that we're practicing right now is also called seed pose. So during the wintertime, the seeds are buried underneath the ground here, and they represent the potential of a new cycle and a new season. That's why this is really meant as a grounding pose here. You're really getting in touch with your internal unmanifested energy. And that's one of the meanings of the winter solstice, is it's not active, it's quiet, it's still, it's dark, it's cool, and just like a seed buried in the ground here. So a few more breaths here, just to recognize that fact. Soften and sink more into this pose. And if you have other intentions and dedications, this is the time to remember them, and to also pay attention to your surroundings and how you're feeling. So a couple more breaths here. And then when you're ready, slowly begin to bring ourselves up and out of this posture. Again, move slowly here, but we are moving into kind of the yang part of this practice here. In fact, we're moving into a little bit of core work here. We're coming right into what I call a forearm plank. So come back to hands and knees. And then when you get to hands and knees, come down onto your forearms. So your forearms about shoulder width apart. And then extend one leg back. Really root your toes into the ground. Raise that knee up. And then see if you can try to do it with the other leg. So you're in this forearm plank, and this is a yang posture. To keep this stable, this shape, your core muscles have to be toning. Your leg muscles have to be toning. And so it's not necessarily the most comfortable posture, but you are breathing. So your diaphragm has to tone. And the best way your diaphragm tones is to breathe here. So maybe one or two more breaths here. And if this is too painful, put your knees down. But after the next breath, everyone can put their knees down. And then bring yourself slowly back up on hands and knees. Come back into table pose. And we'll do some cat and cows just to warm up the spine here. So start out with a nice stable table. And then on your next inhale, sink your belly towards the ground. Tuck your tailbone. Reach your chest forward. Maybe look up if it's okay with your neck. So this is cow pose. This is this back bend. And then exhale and slowly move. Round your spine up towards the ceiling. Tuck your head. Tuck your tailbone. This forward bend is called cat. We'll do 3 more cycles of this. So gently sink yourself back down into cow. And then move yourself slowly back into cat. And feel this. Feel this in your whole torso, in your spine as you move through these. We'll do this a couple more times. So maybe you can use your breath to help you here. So maybe a nice big expansive inhale during the back bend. And a slow contemplative exhale during cat pose here. One more cycle of this. And then just notice how your own torso feels about this. Notice if one side feels better than another, and then bring yourself back to a nice table pose. Now we're moving into downward facing dog here. So maybe move your hands forward slightly, maybe spread them apart. You can even turn the fingers out slightly if you need to. And then tuck your toes under. Lift your hips up. Maybe keep your knees bent as you press your weight back towards your feet here. And then try to maintain a nice neutral spine. You can maybe adjust your feet. I always like to adjust my downward facing dog roots, which are my hands and my feet, to feel more stable here. And
maybe this feels pretty awkward if it's the first downward facing dog you've done. So maybe a little bit of movement, maybe taking your dog for a walk by bending and flexing the knees and the heels, or maybe just staying here in stillness. And again, you can keep your knees nice and bent. You can straighten them out, or you can bring your knees all the way down to the floor if this is a little bit too strainful here. One more breath here in downward facing dog. Then look up between your hands and we'll start to walk the feet forward. So very gently walk your feet towards the front of the mat. And as you do so, maybe knees have to bend. You're coming into a posture known as ragdoll pose, this forward fold. So feet are comfortable width apart. Knees can be straight or bent. You're making sure that you don't have pain or strain going on in the low back or in the hamstrings. So you're adjusting your legs here to do this, but your feet are rooted, your legs are toning to keep you standing, and then your upper torso is softening here. So hands can be on the ground or on blocks, or you can clasp opposite elbows, and then just allow your torso to hang. You can maybe shake your head yes, and shake your head no to release the tension in the neck and in the upper shoulders. And then remember to breathe. Come back to your breath and notice how your breath moves in this shape here. You can even sway yourself back and forth a few times in this pose. Maybe help to get out other tight kinks that might be in the body here. And then at some point you can release your arms, and then from here, slowly roll up to standing. Knees can be bent if they need to be while you're doing this. And then start from your low torso, roll up through the rest of your torso until you finally come up, head and neck come up last, and you find yourself standing in mountain pose. So let's take a moment to stand in this amazing grounding posture. So feel the contact points that both feet make with the ground. Maybe shift back and forth and side to side to see if you can find a better center where you're rooted in the feet. Legs are lightly toning here. Core is lightly toning. This is mountain pose. This is an active posture. You're trying to cultivate the stability of a majestic mountain. Arms can be at your sides, they can be out slightly. If you face the palms forward, notice how the shoulders slightly roll back to open up the front of your torso. And maybe it makes it more expansive to breathe here. Face, head, eyes are relaxed here. And then just notice how your breath helps to maintain stability in Tadasana, in mountain pose here. So a couple more breaths here. And notice your balance here. Notice how both feet help to contribute to the rootedness and the balance of this pose that we've been able to do since we were infants here. And now it's wired into our anatomy, into our consciousness. One more breath and then you can release mountain pose. And now that we know what it's like to balance on 2 feet, we'll try to balance on what? 1. So tree pose is up next. If you know what tree pose is and you're not really interested in doing a balance today, you can always invite yourself over to a wall and use the wall to help in tree pose. Otherwise, we'll do this in stages. So ground through your left foot. Tone through your left leg, that's the leg we're going to balance on. And then bend your right knee and sweep your right knee out to the right. Start with your right toes on the ground, put your right heel on the left ankle. And then this is the beginnings of, this could be your tree pose today. Hands can be at your waist or at heart center. Just see how this feels with your feet on the ground, and this is enough, you stay here. The next stage for tree pose, if you would like to try, is to lift the right foot up off of the ground, place it on the calf, or place it on the left thigh here. Hands can stay wherever they're comfortable. Hands can come up into branches, or maybe a steeple position. Remember, balancing is a verb,
So it's a dynamic, you can feel the micro muscles moving, maybe core is toning to create more stability. Diaphragm needs to tone by breathing, so if you stop breathing, please start breathing again here. And if you fall out of a balancing pose, then congratulations, you just practiced yoga here. So if your arms can come down, you can release the right leg, shake the working leg out a little bit, and then cheerlead yourself to do the other side. Again, if you decided that a wall would have been handy on the first side, maybe a wall is handy on the second side. Start off with rooting through the right foot, toning through the right leg, and toning through the hips and the core here. Bend the left knee, sweep the left knee out to the side. Start out with the left toes on the ground, maybe the left heel on the right ankle or the right shin. And then just stay here for maybe 1 or 2 breaths to decide if this is your tree today. Otherwise, you can start to experiment with bringing that left foot up to the right calf or the right thigh. And then hands can do whatever they want to. So tree pose is happening mostly down in the lower body. The upper body does what it wants to do. Hands can be at the waist, hands can be at heart center, hands can be tree or steeple. And if you're one of those people that find tree pose so easy that you're bored, then just practice this pose with your eyes closed. Otherwise, keep breathing. See if you can stay here for a couple more breaths, but if you can't, that's okay. That's part of the practice here. And then hands come down and you can release feet down to the ground here. Now we're coming up onto the Sun Salutations. We'll do 3 Sun Salutation A's and then 1 more traditional classic Sun Salutation for a total of 4. And the number 4 represents the 4 main seasons that one's experiences when one lives in a temperate zone on this great planet Earth that we live on. So we'll get ready for the first Sun Salutation A. So stand in the mountain pose near the top of your mat here. And then on an inhale, reach your arms up overhead. We'll do this first one pretty slowly here. So this is upward salute. You're kind of growing tall from the heels of your feet all the way to your fingertips here. Maybe a nice breath here. And then on your exhale, we're folding forward. So arms sweep out to the side. Torso is nice and neutral. Knees can be bent if they need to be. And then you just slowly fold yourself all the way over. And then at some point, release your torso. Let it round as you come into a forward fold here. And then come up into a half forward fold. You can put your hands on your shins and lengthen out through your spine to bring it back to a nice, stable, neutral position. And then on another exhale, forward fold again. Bend your knees deeply so you can put both hands on the ground. And then when they're placed on the ground, step the left foot back. Step the right foot back into a plank position. And then lower your knees to the ground, lower your chest and your chin all the way onto the floor. So you're on the ground here now. And then come up into a baby cobra or a little cobra. So hands on the other side of your torso, elbows in close. Reach your sternum forward and up. Come into a light back bend. Some place where you start to feel some resistance, and then gently bring yourself back down to the ground, tuck your toes under. Root through your hands, press your torso up, back, and then come into downward facing dog. Hands, feet are rooted, and then lift your hips up. Stay here for a couple of breaths. And if you need to adjust hands or feet, then go ahead and do so. Knees can stay bent here. And again, downward facing dog is not your cup of tea, then keep your knees on the ground here. At some point, look up between your hands and start walking, stepping, or hopping your feet forward as you come into a forward fold here again. And then at some point, come up into a halfway lift, a half forward fold. Hands can be on the legs for stability. Come back down into a forward fold. And then from here, we're reverse swan diving all the way up towards the ceiling. Arms come up overhead, and then hands come to heart center. So we'll do 2 more of those basic ones, a little bit faster this time, just to generate a little bit of warmth. So inhale, arms come up. overhead. And then exhale into a forward fold. Inhale to a halfway lift to neutralize the spine. Exhale, fold, bend your knees, plant your hands, step the right foot back, step the left foot back, come into plank. Knees lower, lower yourself all the way onto the ground, untuck your toes and come up into your back bend. Your version of Cobra pose here. And then exhale, lower yourself down, tuck your toes under, plant your hands, press yourself back, and then up into a downward facing dog. When you get there, stay there for 1, 2, maybe 3 breaths here. And then at some point, you'll go ahead and bring your feet forward, however you would like, back into a forward fold. And then a halfway lift, half forward fold and reverse swan dive, arms come up overhead, hands to heart center. One more of these cycles. So inhale, arms come up overhead, lengthen here in upward salute, exhale, swan dive forward into a forward fold. Half forward fold to stabilize the spine, forward fold, plant your hands, feet come back. And knees down, or if you like chaturanga, you can do a chaturanga here. Inhale into a Cobra pose or an upward facing dog. Exhale, bring yourself gently back into a downward facing dog. Stay here for a breath or 2. And then when you're ready, feet come forward in between your hands into a forward fold, and then a halfway lift to bring the spine back to neutral, and then reverse swan dive. Bring yourself up into an upward salute, and then exhale. Come back to mountain pose here. So those sequences are known as Sun Salutation A's, and we did 3 of those. We'll do 1 more. This one more will be different. It's more of a what's considered a traditional sun salutation here. It'll be a little bit longer, more involved, a little bit slower than the ones we just did here. So from mountain pose, starts out kind of the same. Arms come up overhead, lengthen here. And then exhale and forward fold again. In, and then from here, come up halfway, half forward fold to lengthen out. Exhale, fold, bend your knees, plant your hands. This time, just send your left foot back towards the back of the mat. Lower the left knee. And then just stay here for a breath in this low lunge here. And then plant your hands, lift the back knee, bring the front foot back to meet the back foot. Come into a plank position here. And then lower your knees to the ground. Lower your chest and your chin all the way onto the floor. And then inhale forward all the way onto your belly. Untuck your toes. Inhale up into a Cobra pose. Exhale back down. Tuck your toes under. Press your torso back and up into a downward facing dog. Stay here for a breath in downward facing dog. And then look up between your hands. Bring your left foot forward between your hands. Gently lower your right knee down onto the ground. Hands root on either side of that front left foot. Lengthen out through your torso. Maybe gaze forward here. And then raise that back right knee up. Bring that right foot forward to meet the front left foot forward fold. And then a halfway lift. And then exhale, fold. And then bring yourself all the way up. Arms up overhead. And then hands to heart center. A couple resting breaths here. This is near the end of the yang warm-up. We're moving into a more stiller, quieter practice known as a yin practice here. So we'll get back down onto the mat with a half sun salutation. So inhale, arms come up overhead, lengthen here, upward salute, exhale, and bring yourself forward into a forward fold. And then inhale, halfway lift, lengthen here.
Exhale, fold, bend your knees, plant your hands. Bring yourself back just to a table pose. And then from table pose, we're moving into the first long residing posture that we'll stay in for a couple of minutes here. This is known as Sphinx Pose. So bring yourself all the way onto your belly here. Legs extended out behind you, comfortable width apart, and then everything is relaxing in the lower body. Bring your elbows up underneath your shoulders. Shoulder width apart. If you don't know what shoulder width apart is, clasp your hands. And then bring your forearms to wherever they're comfortable here. So maybe they're back into Sphinx arms. Or maybe they're clasped here. Or maybe you hold your head up. But relax the muscles in your torso. Let your spine sag from your shoulders down to the ground so that you can feel a light compression in your spine. Now, if it's painful, then lessen the back bend. Otherwise, if it's manageable, just stay here in Sphinx. Use your breath. Use the breath in your torso to help soften the tension in the torso. And we'll actually stay here for a couple minutes. Stay with your breath. Stay with your sensations. And in this more still type of practices, this is a good time to revisit your intention and to pay attention to how you're feeling and how that is interacting with why you're practicing here. Again, this practice is dedicated to the solstices, particularly the winter solstice. And so I'd like to start off talking about the fact that the word solstice itself means stands still. The reason why it's literally translated into standing still is when the ancient peoples watched the sun rise and set along the eastern and the western horizon. At the solstices, the farthest north point during the summer solstice and the farthest southern point during the winter solstice. Again, I'm speaking from the northern hemisphere, not the southern hemisphere. During the winter solstice, the sun would reach its farthest point south of where it rose along the eastern horizon. And it wouldn't change position very much for a couple of weeks around the solstice. It would just kind of stay as if it was trying to figure out if it wanted to keep going south or if it wanted to start heading north again. It was hesitating. It was just kind of stuck there. And it's the same thing happens during the summer solstice. It's kind of hesitate at its highest rising point here. And that's why that's how the solstices got their name. It was at these places where the sun seemed to be stuck. And this caused a lot of concern for people who didn't know what the sun was up to. It's like, well, they were hoping the sun would change its mind and come back and get higher in the sky because it was getting very dark and very cold. And they realized it was getting very dark and very cold because of the motion of the sun. And they were hoping that the sun would change its mind and come back here. We're done with Sphinx here. So if you're still in Sphinx, slowly lower yourself down. And you might actually feel some rebound from staying in Sphinx for so long. You can make a pillow with your hands and rest your head on your hands for a moment here. Or you can turn your head to the side. If you're feeling a lot of achiness in your low back, then maybe drag one knee up alongside your hip, just to open up your hips and your low back enough to relieve any pressure that might be there. A couple of breaths here in this counter position. And then slowly bring yourself up, and we'll slowly move into our next yin type posture. This posture known as sleeping swan here. Some of you might know it more as pigeon pose here. So you can get into this pose from hands and knees. So from a nice table position, bring that left foot up between your hands, inch the right knee back, and then start moving that left foot over to the right side of your yoga mat. Lower the left knee and lower your hips. And you're noticing how this is feeling. It's not supposed to feel injurious.
There can be pressure there can even be some discomfort there, but not sharp burning binding pain. If this is feeling really unstable, you can take a prop and place it underneath your torso and your hips and your thigh to give some stability there. Here, I grabbed a pillow. It could be a block or a blanket here. Maybe do Swan here. This is just a gentle back bend. And then slowly lower yourself forward. Go slowly so you stop at the appropriate point. Maybe it's on forearms. Maybe it's on straight arms. Maybe it's on forearms. Maybe you go all the way down onto the ground here. And then make little micro adjustments. Find a place where we can settle, because we'll stay here for about 2 minutes here. By the way, if you're attempting this pose and it is bringing about a huge amount of pain, this is not your pose. You can bring yourself out, come into a figure 4. So gently bring yourself onto your back. Bend both knees, put your left ankle on your right thigh. Left knee is out wide. And then just take your hands, clasp behind the right thigh. Draw that right leg in until you're feeling a stopping point there. And then with the nice neutral spine and neutral neck here, just come back to your breath and breathe. Otherwise, if you're residing in Sleeping Swan, continue to reside here. And once you're settled, you can bring your focus back to your intention and your dedication. So back to the winter solstice season. And even though we celebrate and think about and honor this season as what we think the sun is doing, it's actually not really the sun that's involved here. It's actually the earth. It's actually this planet that we live on. And it's because the earth is moving around the sun and its axis of rotation is tilted with respect to its orbital axis. And in the wintertime, in the northern hemisphere, during the winter solstice, the pole, the north pole of the earth points away from the sun. The sunbeams are less direct and the sun appears lower in the sky. Meanwhile, down in the southern hemisphere, the southern pole is pointing towards the sun. Everyone down there sees more direct sunlight. It's warmer and the sun is higher in the sky because of this effect of a spherical planet with a tipped rotational axis. Brings about the reason for the seasons here, and it brings about this dramatic effect during the winter solstice when the sun gets very low, and it creates a lot of cold weather. It creates a lot of darkness. And this was a great concern. This was a great concern for the ancient peoples who were trying to figure out why the sun was doing this every single year. And what they realized is that it was forming a pattern. It did this every year. And so it was a cycle. It was a wheel. Just one more breath here on this side. And then bring yourself up into Swan. Slowly move yourself out of Sleeping Swan. I'm going to suggest downward facing dog. So plant your hand, tuck your toes under, press yourself up into downward facing dog. Oh, if that did not feel like a good idea, then do something else here. But if you do end up in dog, then you can do things to work out kinks. You can walk your dog. You can do three-legged dog. And then we'll move into the other side of Sleeping Swan. So coming back to hands and knees, bring that right foot forward, inch the left knee back, and then bring the right foot over to the left. Lower the right knee and the hips, and you can adjust this heel for taste here until you get into your version of Sleeping Swan, of Swan here. And if you're not liking this, then try Eye of the Needle on this side here. And then slowly lower yourself down to some reasonable point here. It can be on straight arms, forearms, or all the way to the ground. You can even take a prop and place a prop underneath your torso if
that would help add a little bit of accessibility here. Otherwise, we'll get in touch with our breath and in touch with our internal sensations here. So throughout the ages, people have realized that the winter solstice is actually not the end. It seems cold and dark. It seems like it's going to last forever. It seems like it's the end, but what they finally realized is the winter solstice is actually not the end. The winter solstice is the beginning. It's the beginning of a new year. It's the beginning of another cycle of seasons of growth. And so that's what the ancients started to see. They started to realize that even though it was dark and cold and it was a time to actually be celebrated because of the coming potential of a new year. And they did this through creating their own versions of light in a time that was darkness, their own versions of festivity. So, in cultures the world over, every human civilization has their version of a winter solstice celebration that they have developed for their particular culture to celebrate this new birth. This new birth, you could call it the birth of the sun, because the sun is at its kind of lowest, most quietest point of the year, and then it rebirths itself by coming back and bringing back more light after the winter solstice. And so we're reminded that that's what the sun is going to do by creating these great celebrations here. One more breath in this celebration of pigeon pose, of sleeping swan, and then we can slowly bring ourselves out. However you would like. You can come back into downward facing dog if you wish, or you can try some other kind of pose here, just to work out the kinks and to get ourselves ready for the next posture. So the cycling of seasons is all about keeping things in balance. Balance lightness with darkness, heat with coolness, activity with stillness. We did the active sun salutations, and now we're doing the quiet still postures. Next posture is called banana pose, and it's a lateral bend, which energy-wise is considered a balancing posture. We think of tree pose as the balancing posture. But these lateral bends are a different kind of balance. So make your way onto your back, legs extended out in front. And then slowly, keeping your hips flat on the mat, just start inching your extended legs and feet over to the right side. Maybe inch your torso over to the right side too. So you're going until things stop. Usually they stop before you want them to stop. You're creating this crescent moon shape, this banana shape. And you can experiment with crossing your heels or not crossing them. You can experiment with extending your arms out overhead. Head and neck should be comfortable. So if they got kind of rolled around and kinked, unkink the head and the neck. And then trying to keep this left hip low to the ground so that you feel the stiffness, the pressure somewhere along the left side. And all you have to do is reside here. If you're not feeling anything, maybe the heels can go over to the right a little bit more. If you're feeling too much, you always give yourself the power and the permission to back off here. And then notice your breath. Notice this mini cycle of inhales and exhales that mimics the yearly cycles of the earth moving around the sun, going through these seasons that may be reversed if you live in the southern hemisphere. So a lot of Western civilizations were developed in the northern hemisphere, so their celebrations of the seasons are reflected around the northern seasons. And if you happen to come from a northern culture and you move to the southern hemisphere, it's very interesting because you may be have celebrations in the southern hemisphere. For example, you might be in ways celebrating the winter solstice even though you're celebrating the summer solstice. So this time of year, maybe it's really hot and sunny outside and you go surfing instead of getting close to a fire and drinking some hot chocolate here or so. What other things do you do to cultivate warmth and light in a season that seems to be all about cold and darkness? Oh, but so much potential. So much potential. This is why we acknowledge it. This is why we celebrate it. Just one more breath here on this side of banana. And then when you're ready, you'll slowly bring yourself back to center. We have the other side of banana to do, but if there's some wiggling around that you would like to do to work out the kinks, then go ahead and do that. Oh, I like to just bring my knees into my chest and give my knees a nice hug in between the two sides of banana pose. But you might have something else in mind that you would like to do to work out the kinks. And then when you're ready, move yourself into the other side of banana pose. So extend your legs out long, get nice and long here, and then hips are flat, particularly that right hip. Start inching the legs over to the left until they're stuck. And again, you can, for your own taste, you can experiment with crossing heels. Start moving. So the hips are trying to stay stationary. Everything else is trying to move to the left. Open up through this right side. Arms can stay at your side. They can lengthen out overhead. If this creates nerve pinching, go ahead and keep your arms in a more comfortable position. Head and neck are comfortable. And then, even though we create celebrations of light and festivity, it is good during the winter season to cultivate and to notice and pay attention to what the winter solstice season is actually showing us, that in order for this cycle to work, in order for us to maintain balance in nature in our lives, there must be moments of stillness. There must be moments of quiet. Right now we're practicing a kind of yoga called yin yoga, which has those same qualities. Notice we're in banana pose and we're hanging out in banana pose for a goodly long time here. And these remind us of the qualities of the winter solstice, which is why it's appropriate to move and to create warmth during the cool winter time, but also to acknowledge that stillness and quiet are part of this balance. And the seasons are trying to teach us that there have to be times of warmth and there has to be times of coolness, of light and of darkness. So just a couple more breaths here on this side of banana pose. And then when you're feeling ready, you slowly inch yourself back to your center. Notice the reverberation from that long hold. And then at some point, draw your knees into your torso. Give them a nice hug again. We're moving into a reclined twist here. So that was the last really long posture. But we'll stay in this twist a few breaths on either side. So knees are bent, they're in towards your torso. And then maybe take your hands and help guide your knees over to the right. So knees lower over to the right. The left shoulder is trying to ooze back towards the left so that your torso is in a spinal twist. Maybe arms come out in T or into cactus arm position here. And if it's okay with your neck, you can turn your head to the right just to create a complete spinal twist here. And we're just going to stay here for a couple of more breaths. And then bring your knees back up to center. Pause for a breath. We're going to the other side. Maybe you can take one of your hands and lower, guide your knees down over to the left side. Right shoulder is trying to ooze back towards the ground. Maybe it makes it to the ground, but it doesn't have to. And just the intention of this is to make sure your spine is in a twist here. And again, arm is where it's most useful or valuable to you. Maybe T or cactus arm position. Let's reside here for a couple of breaths. And then maybe use an inhale to bring your knees back up to center. From here, we're moving into our final resting posture. But before you do that, if there's any final postures that you would like to practice to work out any imbalances or kinks, and this is maybe a good time to practice them now, just for a few breaths, and then bring yourself into your version of a resting pose. You can take traditional Shavasana, which is just basically lying on your back, arms and legs extended here. If you have blankets or pillows and you're chilly, use the blankets for warmth. If you feel a lot of strain in your low back, maybe keep your knees bent. I'm going to suggest legs up the wall posture for this final posture. So you will need a little bit of wall space. And you can use a pillow, you can use a bolster to place your hips on. In this case, I'm going to just use this blanket. And then move over, sit next to the wall on your side, and then roll yourself up, legs up the wall. Hardest part about this pose is actually getting into the pose. So it might take a few tries to get here. And then arms are extended comfortably out to either side. Head and neck are comfortable. Or if you have like a pillow, that's a nice thing. And then soften, settle here. Knees can be bent slightly if they need to be, or they can be straight if they're comfortable that way. Torso is neutral here. And if you're here and this is not very comfortable and maybe even painful, maybe give yourself permission to come back to another ending posture, another final resting posture. This final posture is the essence of the winter solstice. You're cultivating a sense of stillness. You're cultivating a sense of peacefulness and quiet. It's what nature is doing. In the winter solstice, all the trees, all the plant life, all animal life becomes much quieter, much more dormant. Waiting comes in. It's a season of patience and a season of waiting. That's why it's a birth. It's the birth of all the new potential of the coming seasons of cycle as the planet, this home planet that we live on, begins another journey around the sun. And then as it does so, it creates these spectacular changes in energy and in light and in warmth. And we remind ourselves of this through our contemplations, through our activities, through this honoring, through this celebration of the seasons, realizing that the Earth's journey is a natural phenomenon, and we're connected to that because we are also natural phenomena. We're part of the Earth. We're part of the solar system. We're part of our galaxy. We're part of the entire universe. Indeed, each one of us is the universe's way to know itself. And through acknowledging the natural cycles, such as the seasons, such as the winter solstice, we know the universe. Bring yourself back into your room, into your body. You can begin to deepen your breath. At some point, you can make little motions with fingers and with toes. Expanding the motion into hands, into feet. You can make little motions with arms and with the legs. Maybe you gently rock your head from side to side. If your legs up the wall, bend your knees, bring your feet up against the wall. Maybe press yourself away from the wall a few inches. And then slowly roll over to one side. If you're just laying on your back, bend your knees and roll onto your side. When you get there, stay there for a moment. Give yourself a big thank you for your practice, but also a big thank you for you. Your precious and unique manifestation in this universe. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you are here. And then when you feel ready, slowly bring yourself up into a comfortable seat. Settle here so that you can rediscover your inner ground. Maybe notice your breath here again, and then bring your hands together at heart center. So I'll end practice with an Om. You can simply listen or maybe join in. The inner sunlight in me honors the inner sunlight in you. Namaste.